G'day poker people, welcome back. After returning to the United States, I was staying in Sarasota with my girlfriend, her brother, and their two dogs in a 2-bedroom apartment in Sarasota. And after about 3 months of being in that living situation, the lease on the apartment was about to run up. And because things were going so well between Brendan and I, despite the living arrangements, we thought it would probably be a good idea if we decided to move out and get our own place together with one of the dogs. So after a few weeks of looking around at different apartments, we found one in the north of Tampa that we both really liked. So we decided to move there. It was also only 20 minutes away from the Seminole Hard Rock Tampa. So once we moved there, I was putting in a bunch of volume in these 5 games. The following is going to be a recap of my first week having moved back up there. So let's not waste any more time and get into the action. First hand up, we've got a cut-off straddle on and a passive big blind open limps. And then I'm in what would have been the under the gun position with pocket sixes. This hand is definitely too loose to be V-pipping at this point with so many people left to act. A cut-off straddle who's very likely to call and then get to play the pot in position with you. The right play here is definitely just to make a disciplined fold. But you know the vlogger motto, folding is boring. So I go ahead and raise it up. I make it 55 and then the cutoff straddle calls and the original limper actually folds. So we do go heads up to a flop of queen, 6 rainbow. Let's freaking go. We hit the set. We're out of position with an absolute monster hand and a short stack cutoff. I think it's actually a pretty easy decision to check it over to the opponent and try and induce a loose bet here. That's what I do. I check it over to them and then we hear the good news because they go all in for their remaining 195. Definitely not going to be a dickhead and slow roll this guy. I call straight away and show him my set of sixes. The villain says, "Oh, you're good, bro." And then the turn, 6 of hearts. So wow, we make quads. Don't know what the villain has. The river's a 4. The villain ends up mucking their hand and we end up stacking them. But also we win the high hand for a cheeky little $300 extra bonus. What a way to kick things off after moving to Tampa. Let's go. Next hand up, an under the gun passive player limps. Then the action folds to an aggressive cutoff who goes ahead and raises it up to 30. Then the action folds to my big blind and I have ace queen offsuit. Now I think if I was heads up with the cutoff, I might just flat here just because this hand is going to do really well against a cutoff opening range. But I will say with the under the gun player limping in, if we do just flat here, they're probably going to overcall and then we're playing the pot out of position to 2 people when we wouldn't have had to if we 3-bet. So I do decide to 3-bet here. I go ahead and make it 130 and then the limper folds and the cutoff calls. So we go heads up to a flop of 8-7-3 rainbow. And before I have the chance to do anything, the cutoff actually bets out of turn for 75. And before we get into what this might mean, I will say that whenever someone bets out of turn, like you kind of have to check it over to them. Otherwise, you totally negate the informational advantage you get by them betting out of turn. This is a little thing I would always recommend checking when someone bets out of turn. So I do check it to them. The 75 is forced to stand. And now the action's back on me. And I think it's pretty interesting whether we want to check raise or just call this bet. Definitely don't want to fold. I think the chances my ace high here are pretty good. Just because I think if the opponent is trying to do some type of angle by betting out of turn and like freeze the action, it could be because they have a weak draw or a weak pair that we can maybe get them off of later. So definitely don't want to fold. Could check raise here to try and fold out that range of middling to weak strength hands, but I think calling's fine too since we are going to be ahead of a lot of their range. So I decided to call in this instance. Really wouldn't hate going either way though. Whatever the case, I do call and we do get to see the turn, which is the queen of diamonds. Let's go. We improve to top. Still check it over to the villain, hoping that they're going to continue bluffing with some of their draws or whatnot. And they do go ahead and bet. They make it 100. Now the action's back on me here and definitely not going to fold now that I made top pair, top kicker. I think it's interesting whether I want to check or I want to rip it all in for 395. The only benefit to calling, I would say, is if I think my opponent is bluffing and they will continue to bluff on the river. That would be why I would call, just to get the bluffs in their range. Having said that, I don't think they will continue to bluff on the river because the SPR will be less than 0.5. And if I go all in here anyway, my opponent does have something like the backdoor flush draw or a flopped open-ended straight draw. I think they're probably just going to call off anyway at this point, betting that they're getting a pretty good price to see if they get there on the river. So that's what I decide to do. I rip it all in for the 395 and then the villain throws in the call. We show the ace queen and then the opponent shows king queen. So wow, they got there on the turn 2. What a beautiful turn card. Really glad I did not check raise on the flop now, because I definitely would have just folded it. We just have to fade the opponent making 2 pair on the river, and the river does put in a 2 pair, but it's the ace of diamonds. We make the 2 pair, and we're scooping the second villain this week. Happy days, let's freaking go. Next hand up, we've got the $10 under the gun straddle on, and I know, because I put it on, the Pro Gambling Club, at least for today, mixing it up with the straddle, increasing the size of the game, and then a passive button open limbs, and then a quite aggressive big blind raises it up to 30, and I'm in the straddle with 9-7 of diamonds, and I think in this spot, you either want to be 3-betting or folding this hand, kind of similar to the last hand, how there is a limper that will have position on us during the hand. I think you want to discourage that as much as you possibly can. So if you are going to play this hand, I think 3-betting is the way to go. In game, I did decide to flat. It's a bit undisciplined. I mean, it's a decent hand to flat with. I just think 3-betting is probably the better option out of all 3. In my opinion, whatever the case, I do flat, which isn't an awful play or anything, just maybe not the best one. But I call, and then predictably, the button limper does call as well. So we do go 3 ways to a flop of 10-8 deuce with 2 spades and no diamonds. And then the big blind C-bets for 50. The action's on me here, and I decided to just call here. I'm pretty happy with this play facing a larger C-bet into 2 people. I think it's very likely the opponent does have a strong range, and I'm probably going to get less folds with a raise. So I think flatting and just taking my equity probably is the right play. So I flat, and then the button gets out of the way. Heads up to a turn, which is the 2 of diamonds, pairing bottom pair, and then the villain continues to bet. They go ahead and make it 75. And now we're getting a really good price to draw to our open-ended straight draw. The cheeky thought of raising here does enter my mind, but I think flatting is fine too. It's a great price, and we're playing in position to try and outdraw whatever their hand that probably is stronger than 9 high is. So I do curl. Again, I wouldn't hate raising in this spot. I've taken all the passive lines so far in this hand. Let's see if things change on the river, because river is the 9 of spades. So we do improve to a pair, but the opponent doesn't slow down. They go ahead and bet 100. Now the action's on me here, and all 3 options between calling, folding, and raising do enter my mind. I think the worst option probably is calling. I think it's very likely the opponent has a 10x or overpair hand. Just the fact that they've gone bet inclines me to believe that's the type of hand they have. So yeah, calling kind of goes off of the table for me. Wouldn't hate folding in this spot, since I do think I'm behind, and when you think you're behind on the river, folding is always going to be a plus EV option. But I get a bit cheeky here. I think this is actually a good spot to raise. Maybe not the best combination we could possibly raise here, since we don't block any of the front door flushes, but I'm kind of convinced that the tight aggressive opponent probably wouldn't down bet so small in the river if they did hit their flush. Like I said, I think it's going to be a lot of strong 1-pair hands like a 10x or an overpair, and I just don't think those hands are going to call off if I raise here when the front door flush got it in. So I decide to go for it. I raise it up to 350, and then the opponent is in the tank, probably a good 30 seconds or so before folding their cards. So let's go. Fairly certain with the extended tank they didn't have absolutely nothing, and we probably did bluff them off a better hand. You love to see it. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different Anti-Gambling Club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Next up, we have 3 open limbs, and then a tight aggressive small blind raises it up to 20, and then I'm in the big blind with 10-9 of clubs, and very similar to the previous hand where I said if I'm going to play this hand, I think 3-betting is probably the best way to do it, and even more so in this instance when we've got 3 people that could potentially call behind. So I think this is a 3-bet or fold spot, and I actually play it well this time. I do decide to 3-bet. I make it 70, and then a passive under the gun limper actually calls the 3-bet. And then everyone else folds. It's not exactly what I was expecting, but I will say I'm very concerned when a tight passive player limp calls my 3-bet. I think that's a very, very strong range. Even if they had aces, I wouldn't be totally shocked, in all honesty. Like I said, I think I'm against a very, very strong range here. So hopefully we can crack some premiums on the flop, and the flop is 10-10-4 with 2 hearts. Let's freaking go. I really hope my opponent has aces here. So when the action's on me, I'm going to go ahead and do what I like to call value betting. I make it 60 and then under the gun calls. So we are heads up to the turn, which is the jack of spades putting out backdoor spades. Definitely want to continue to bet for value here. In fact, I actually want to use a pretty large sizing. Like I said, I do give my opponent credit for having all of the overpairs to this board, plus a bunch of nut flush draw combinations. This is a very tight opponent, so I really don't ever expect to get called by anything that's worse than Jack X, and I think they would have folded a lot of their Jack X combinations that weren't flush draws on the flop anyway. I think using a really large bet here probably is the right play. In game, I went ahead and bet 175. I think I could have gone a lot bigger than this, in all honesty. Something like 300 would probably be a better size bet in my opinion. Whatever the case, I made it 175, too small, but the villain does throw in the call. So heads up to the river, which is the 6 of hearts. Absolutely hate to see this river. Being that my opponent is tight and passive, I actually think if I bet here, they probably will fold an overpair when the front door flush gets in, because they got to put me on a flush or a 10x when I take this line, and they're a tight opponent who doesn't believe in bluffing. So I go ahead and check it over to them, and then they go ahead and check back. So we're feeling very good, likely that they did have an overpair. So I end up showing my trip 10s, and then the villain shows ace queen of hearts. So what? They got there with a nut flush on the river and then checked it back because they were so worried about a full house, I guess is the only reason why. But oh my God, we absolutely dodge a bullet here, and very, very happy that the opponent did take such a passive line with this hand. Obviously we do cop a small bet beat in this instance, but yeah, man, like I've always said the Tampa games are tight, but man, judge for yourself. Next hand up, we've got another limp from the low jack, and then I'm in the hijack with pocket 10s. I buff it up to 25, and then I get called by 3 different players, including the original limper. So we go 4 ways to a flop of 10. Love to see that. 9, 6, all spades though. So we do hit top set, which I'm usually pretty stoked about, but definitely have to be a bit cautious against 3 different ranges when it's all spades on the flop, especially when a tight player from the big blind leads out for 50. Both the other players fold, and the action's back on me here. And honestly, even though the opponent only bet half pot, they did bet it into 3 different people, and they are very tight. So honestly, I'm already pretty concerned that they do have a flush. They've got a bunch in their range that they're probably going to lead out with. Maybe even the straight as well. Not totally impossible that they do have a worse set or 10-9, but I do think their leading range here is very strong. And even with a hand as strong as top set, I do have to play it a bit cautious. So I do decide to throw in the flat, seeing what happens on the turn. Then we get to see the turn, which is the 10 of clubs. Let's freaking go. We make quads. Now, I really, really hope my opponent does have a flush or a straight, because ain't no way they're going to be folding now. And they continue to bet. They go ahead and make it 50. I think there's nothing to do here but just call. The SPR will be less than 1 on the river if I flat. So if they do have a flush, like they're just not getting away from it on the river. And I don't see any reason to do anything but just call here. So that's what I do. I slow play the quads, I throw in the call, and we do get to see the river, which is the 3 of clubs. Changes nothing in the big blind's mind because they continue to bet for 50 for the 3rd straight in a row. I just put them all in, and then the villain kind of scrunches up their face, looking like they don't like it, but they do end up throwing in the call. You love to see it. I end up showing my quad 10s, and the villain marks. So let's go. Not only do we stack this opponent, stack a second opponent with quads, but we also win a second high hand with quads. Let's freaking go. This time it's for 280. Boy, are we running good after moving to Tampa. Let's go. Next hand up, a passive under the gun player limps, and then a tight aggressive cutoff makes it 25. And then I'm in the small blind with pocket 9s, definitely a hand strong enough to 3-bet. I make it 110, and then both the limper and the cutoff call. So we are 3 ways out of position to a flop of 9. Freaking go another set. Yes, 9-7-3, a rainbow. Action starts off on me, and I do this thing called value betting. I make it 125, and then the limper folds and the cutoff calls. So it heads up to a turn, which is the king of spades, putting out backdoor spades, and kind of an interesting turn card because I do think it's possible that the villain does have ace king in their range. being that people don't like to 4-bet that hand in Tampa, I think they're definitely going to float that hand facing a smallish bet on the flop. So they definitely do have a bunch of King X combinations, including Ace King. So I think maybe I should size it to something where I can bet here and then go all in on the river for a price that's kind of like reasonable for Ace King to call. So I size it to 200 here, and then the villain thinks about it for a little bit before throwing in the call. So we are heads up to the river, and the river is the 7 of spades, not only putting in the backdoor flush draw, but also giving us a full house. So we are feeling very, very nutted here. It is a bit concerning though, because if my opponent is going to be able to get away from Ace King or a King X hand, this is probably the river to do it in, because it's going to be pretty hard for me to have bluffs. But the SPR is only a little bit over 2/3, so nothing to do here but rip it all in and hoping my opponent gets sticky with a King X combination or a worse pair. I rip it all in, and then the villain is in the tank, and it's an extended tank. It probably lasts about 2 minutes. Very painful. You guys know I hate extended tanks, but they're in there. They're in the tank the whole time. I'm thinking, call with your Ace King, call with your Ace King, call with your Ace King. They definitely do have some worse hands in their range. They probably have pocket queens, pocket jacks, some 9x combinations as well, but this is going to be a very scary river card, so not totally expecting to get called by those hands, particularly the longer the tank goes on. But after about 2 minutes of tanking, they audibly sigh and they slide their chips in the middle. We love to see it. I show my pocket nines and their hand goes in the muck straight away. They definitely didn't want to show whatever they had, which makes me suspect maybe they did make a light call down. But whatever the case, we stack someone after flopping a set for the 3rd time this week. Definitely can't complain about running bad. Let's freaking go. Next hand up, we're playing pretty late on a Thursday evening / Friday morning, and down to 6 people left in the game, and a passive middle position player open limps, and then I'm on the button with King Queen offsuit. I boof it up to 25, and then a tight aggressive small blind who I have a lot of history playing with at the Seminole Hard Rock calls, and then the limper calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop of Queen 10-6 with 2 clubs. The action checks to me, and I think this is a good spot to see bet my top pair for value in position. I make it 40, and then both the villains call. So we are still 3 ways to a term, which is the 3 of hearts. The action checks to me again, and I think we can still get value with this hand, get called by worse queens, and there's a bunch of different draws on this board. It is getting pretty dicey, betting into 2 different ranges. Particularly the small blind, I think, is going to realize if I bet here, I am pretty strong, so I wouldn't be totally shocked if they even folded a hand like Queen Jack. So maybe it's a good spot to check for deception. I think if I had this decision back, I probably would continue to bet and see what happens, but in this instance I did check it, playing it a bit cautious, maybe a bit too cautious. Let me know how you feel about this check in the comments below. Regardless, I check it, and we do get to see a free river. Is the Queen of Spades. Say we do trip up on the river. Love to see that, until the small blind goes ahead and bets out for 225. The middle position player folds, and now I'm actually pretty concerned that I'm behind, because a tight aggressive opponent taking a large overbet size into 2 different people, particularly when top pair pairs, like, it just seems like a move he would make if he had a hand that could beat trips, right? And he's just bombing it because it's like he thinks who's going to be able to fold trips. So straight away, alarm bells are going off when he uses this large sizing that like, maybe my trips aren't good. As crazy as that seems, as tight as it may be to fold this hand, I think with the multi-way dynamics, that's kind of the key that keys us into like, actually we should be able to fold King Queen here. Like even if he had Queen Jack, I don't think he would use this large of a sizing, because he is going to be concerned about one of me or the opponent having Ace Queen or King Queen. So as tight as it may seem, I think folding is the right play here against a tight regular who is going to be able to hand read pretty well. Roast me if you think that that is too tight of a fold to make, but I think I should have been able to sniff this one out. But after tanking for 30 seconds, I guess I couldn't muster up the discipline to make the good lay down, because I do throw in the call here, which I genuinely think is a mistake even before we see results. But we do get to see results because the opponent turns over pocket 10s. So there you go. I think his large bet should have totally let us off of the hook here, but yeah, clearly didn't have the discipline to muster up a fold here. And I actually wrote on Instagram after this happened, like, I will not pay off regs over bets going forward, which I don't think is 100% the right strategy 100% of the time, but I think with the dynamics of this hand, I should have been able to sniff it out, and I'm pretty disappointed I gave away $225 here. The next time I came back to the Hard Rock, it had gone into August of 2022 to date this vlog pretty significantly. But when I came back, I learned that the maximum buy-in for the 2.5 game had gone from 1,000 to 1,500. So I was actually pretty happy to hear this at the time, because I thought, well, if there's going to be more money on the table, this is going to be better for my win rate over the long run. We'll see how that pans out long term, but I was pretty excited to hear it in the moment. So I was back in the 2.5 in for 1,500 this time. We played this hand. So one of the very first hands when I sit down at the table, we've got a button straddle on, and then a unknown small blind who I do not recognize at all opens it for 35, and the action folds to my cutoff with pocket kings, baby, let's go. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 100. The action gets back to the small blind and they reach for chips. Not to call though, they go ahead and 4-bet it to 355. The action's back on me here, and I talk a lot about how 4-bets are extremely nutted at the Seminole Hard Rock Tampa, and I do stick by that. The one thing I will say is this is an unknown opponent. I don't have any experience with them, so they could be potentially really crazy for all I know, or even potentially just playing a reasonable 4-bet range here. So I really don't have any reads on this specific opponent. But with general trends in Tampa, I should be at least somewhat concerned that my opponent is going to have a very high ratio of pocket aces when they 4-bet. So I think proceeding with a call is the right play, particularly when I am in position, and particularly when we're 1,500 effective. I don't know if I would be 5-betting aces here even. So I do just decide to call, but yeah, I wouldn't hate a 5-bet. I would actually rather 5-bet with kings and aces, but I continue as a call in this instance. Let me know if you disagree in the comments, but we do go heads up to a flop of Jack 9-4 with 2 clubs, and the opponent goes ahead and c-bets 250, and straight away I'll just say I'm not considering folding here. I wouldn't be shocked if my opponent did have pocket queens. Despite the tight dynamics in Tampa, I really just don't think I should assume that of just a random guy that I don't recognize at all. So I take that off of the table. I considered going all in for about 1,300 here and trying to stack the queens, or deny equity to ace-x combinations that like might shut down bluffs on the turn anyway when they're going to put me on a strong range when I call. So yeah, maybe going all in just is the best play here, but I do decide to flat, maybe a bit overly scared of my opponent having aces. There is the benefit that potentially they will continue to bluff on the turn. I just don't expect it. So yeah, I think maybe I made a mistake by just flatting here. Again, it's going to be a pretty close spot, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Go heads up to the turn, which is Queen of Spades. I absolutely hate seeing this turn card. Now we lose to all of my opponent's value on this board, and to make things worse, they rip it all in for 995. Absolutely hating life in this spot. Lose to aces, lose to queens. I said that I thought my opponent would shut down with a lot of their ace-x bluffs on the turn. I suppose ace-king did actually turn a lot of equity on this turn card, so not totally impossible that they are continuing to bluff with that combination specifically on this turn card, but I just can't get it out of my head that I do lose to their aces, I lose to their queens. Even if they 4-bet jacks, I wouldn't be totally shocked, but I lose to that as well. So really only beat bluffs, and we are in Tampa. I don't really expect to be shown a bluff. Maybe that's a bit naive against an unknown opponent, but I do think giving them the tight range, this probably is a spot where I unfortunately have to fold my pocket kings. So after thinking about it for a few seconds, I put my kings in the muck, and then my opponent pops up and they're like, let's go, and they turn over Queen 10 offsuit. So oh my god, they completely bluffed me off with my kings. Apparently they were aware that their queen was no good there, so they were deliberately targeting me folding kings or aces, which I don't know, that's a crazy play, but power to them, it works. Can't hate on results, but yeah, pretty disappointed that I didn't take a more aggressive line earlier or just station off. So JJ to the villain, good bluff, mate. Let's try and get some redemption in this next hand. The button straddle is on yet again, and the same loose aggressive player limps in the small blind. The action folds around to my cutoff again, and I have 10-8 of hearts this time. Definitely a much weaker hand, but I think it's good enough to ISO raise in this spot with only 2 people left to act. So I make it 55, and then a quite aggressive button 3-bets it to 125. The small blind gets out of the way, and the action's back on me here, and really do think that we can safely assume this opponent does have a very strong range, being that they're a tighter player and they 3-bet like a size that's just screams, in my opinion, please call, please fold, please don't fold. So definitely put them on a strong range here and getting a really good price. I think maybe this is a good opportunity to try and crack their aces or kings here. So I do throw in the call and we are heads up to a flop, praying that it's something beautiful for us. And the flop is an 8-6 rainbow. That is absolutely gorgeous to us. We've already cracked aces or kings. So I go ahead and check it over to the opponent. They see bet for 110 and you already know I'm check raising to try and stack their aces and kings. I go ahead and make it 250, which I actually think is way too small for sizing. I think I should be going something closer to 400 because I really don't think they're going to fold aces or kings, which will just leave a really low SPR on the turn and I'm going to get stacks in against that hand. So probably bet a bit too small on this one, but I did go ahead and make it 250 and unsurprisingly, the villain does call. So we're heads up to the turn, which is the 4 diamonds, putting out backdoor diamonds, and you already know I'm all in here. Pretty large overbet of the pot, but I can just tell this guy is not going to fold his overpair. I rip it all in and then the villain snap calls, much like we were expecting, still very confident that they do have aces or kings or maybe queens and jacks as well. You know, this is a great board for us. So I do go, oh, I hit 2 pair, bro. I turn over my hand straight away and then he's like, oh, you're good. And then the river is the 6 of clubs and the opponent literally jumps out of his chair and screams, yes! And then slams down the pocket aces. So he counterfeit our 2 pair and he's going to end up getting us on this hand. Obviously a bit of a bad beat on the river and a very, I don't want to say annoying, but annoying opponent just having such a massive celebration after giving us the bad beat. Unsurprisingly, this guy did end up leaving the table about 15 minutes later. I sound pretty salty right now, but honestly, GG to them. We got cheeky trying to crack their aces and it ended up Uno reversing on us and the egg was on our face. So after that 12-hour session, I did end up losing over $1,900. So much for that higher hourly rate with a bigger buy-in. But wasn't discouraged. The next time I went back to the casino, they were running a $1,000 every 15 minutes high hand promo. And I love playing these promos. You guys already know I love a bit of extra money being injected into the games. And I got there about 10 minutes early and I was definitely too late. I had to wait about an hour before I could hop in a 2-5 game. Last time I'll make that mistake, but once I was in that 2-5 game, I was ready to rumble. It's where I played this hand. Tight aggressive under the gun player makes it 15 and then the action folds to my low jack and it's my turn to start throwing around some batteries, baby. I have double A's, pocket aces, let's go. I make it 50. Then the action folds to a passive button who goes ahead and 4 bets to 100. Boy, I don't know if there's a better feeling in poker than when you have pocket aces and someone 4 bets you pre-flop. The under the gun player gets out of the way. And now I think it's a pretty interesting decision here. I do like trapping with my aces pre-flop facing 4 bets, just because when you do 5 bet, it's kind of face up in all honesty. But I think when I'm facing a passive opponent's 4 bet, like their range is so strong here. We just should absolutely try to buff this pot up and try and create a low SPR so we can get stacks in as soon as possible. So that's what I do in this instance. I go ahead and make it 250. Slight critique, I actually would like using a larger size. If I really think the opponent isn't going to have a 4 bet fold range, like I wouldn't think going all in here would be totally out of the question. Either way, I think I should definitely be going a larger size than 250. Whatever the case, that's what I did in this instance. I made it 250 and then the villain does throw in the call. So we are heads up to a flop of ace, king, 8 rainbow. So yet again, another top set this week. You love to see it. I go ahead and value bet my top set again. I go ahead and make it 100 and then the villain does throw in the call. And the turn is the 8 of spades, putting out backdoor spades. Not as particularly relevant because we do have a full house. And I just like to check it to the villain in this instance. I think this is a spot where we're probably just going to be free rolling bluffs. I think if my opponent has ace king or pocket kings, they're going to go ahead and bet themselves. So we don't need to bet to try and get value from those hands. And if we do continue to bet here and my opponent does have like queens or jacks or even a weak ace, I think they're probably just going to fold. So I really think we should just check it to them and free roll some bluffs. So that's what I do. I checked it over to them and then they do check back. So pretty unlikely we have super cool ace king or pocket kings at this point. So we do get to see a river, which is the 6 of clubs. Now, I really don't think my opponent does have a super strong hand. Maybe a weak ace X or pocket queens or pocket jacks. So I think I should just size down to try and get value from one of those hands. So that's what I do. I make it 225 and then the villain calls pretty quickly. I show the second nuts on this board and the villain does muck. So didn't call their hearts on the flop, which I did for a 5-bet to a smaller size pre-flop. So I think that was definitely a mistake in this instance. Not complaining though, raking in another pot with the nut full house. Let's go. Thanks for sticking all the way to the end. I really do love and appreciate you guys doing that. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to see my next video. We're going to spice things up and mix in a bit of a poker challenge. So make sure you subscribe and get the first part of the challenge when it does come out. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.